Good afternoon, Mesa Halher. Good to be here. I enjoyed that last panel, and actually in many ways it set us up quite nicely for this conversation. So thank you all for coming. Our industry is in a state, a fairly bold statement, something I think I might have said about 10 years ago. I don't believe that's the case now. In many ways, I think the opposite. I think our industry, our sector, or the workplace sector is in probably the best place it's ever been in many ways. So why are we here? From what I can see, nobody's online, nobody's joining online, thank goodness. We've all chosen to be here, we've all flown in some cases from a long way to be together, to connect, lots of familiar faces, smiling faces at this event. We're here because we're human. We're here because we want to be, we're here because we want to connect. We're here because we want to build relationships, maybe win some business as well, depending on why you're here. So, it's a subject I'm really passionate about, and we talked about it in the last panel a little bit, is the idea of actually bringing in human-centric humanity into design. And it's something that sometimes we do very well as an industry, sometimes we do very badly, but I think it's something that we certainly need to do a lot better. Sorry. How do I go backwards? Don't worry, it's okay, it's okay. You saw that the slide before, it says I can't hear myself think, and I want to use an example of something that happened a few years ago on a project that I thought was really interesting, and it actually highlighted, can you get them to go back one, please? Yeah. It actually highlighted this idea of, design needs to be much more than the physical. It needs to be much more than what we're doing in the space. It needs to be about our emotions. So we had a client in London, they wanted to open an office in Dubai, and they had this amazing space in London that was just full of energy. Whatever time of day you went in there, it was busy, there was people meeting, having coffee, having town halls, connecting. It was actually the kitchen within the space. And they basically said, look, we don't necessarily want a carbon copy, but we'd like to recreate that energy in our Dubai office. How do we do that? So it's, okay. Let's also take the lessons learned from the Dubai office, from the London office, and let's improve on that. Make sure we're respecting local nuances. Let's make it better. Let's make it, an evolution of what we've got in London. So we did that. We created this amazing space. Looked great, ticked all the boxes. Actually, it was an evolution of what we'd done, or they'd done in London. Nobody used it. It was empty, right? And they were scratching their heads, we were scratching our heads, and we couldn't understand why. And we were talking about redesign, we were talking about changes. And we were sitting there, and we had a bit of an epiphany and said, well, look, we've got all these screens in this space. Let's just try something. Just turn up the volume. It might have been BBC or CNN or whatever they were showing on the screens. Just turn up the volume. So it was audible, but it wasn't, overwhelming. Within 2 days, the space was full. Everybody was using it, and we sort of managed to get that same atmosphere that we had in London. So that really opened my eyes. I've always been passionate about the subject, but that really opened my eyes to the fact that we've really got to think beyond the design. Think beyond the physical. Make sure that it's not just about winning design awards, although they are nice. So when I was putting this together, the Olympics jumped out. I love the Olympics. I don't know if you guys did, but I would get home, switch it on, and find myself watching rock climbing for 4 hours or table tennis and becoming the guru on the subject. But it is the best of the best of the best, right? These are people who have trained for 4 years, 10 years, maybe it's their second or third Olympics. I tried to find a topic that was more local that I could sort of integrate into this, and came across this guy. Now, the Saudis in the room might know him. He's something of a rock star in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had never won a medal in the Olympics. This gentleman won silver, very nearly won gold in the last Olympics, I will add. And actually, it was one penalty point that took him from gold to silver, but incredible. Now, he would have trained for many, many years, and I did a bit of research on him. What was interesting was, as with any athlete or Olympian from anywhere in the world, there would have been a number of collisions or serendipitous moments throughout their journey to get to silver or gold or a World Cup, whether that was a coach or a nutritionalist or what have you. There's these collisions, moments, meeting people that may take you in a different direction. So it's really a series of collisions, and I think it's true of all of us, no matter how successful we are. We've all been to house parties, or we've hosted house parties, and inevitably we end up in the kitchen, unless you've got catering, of course. And it's usually because the food's there, the drinks are there, but I think there's something deeper. I think anyone who ends up in the kitchen usually likes to think in some way they're contributing, even though they're probably not. They're probably getting in the way. But it's natural that we end up, in one area in the room and in the house. It's great to see that festivals are back, although they were hit hard during COVID, of course. So why is it we're still going to festivals? And you look at what's happening in Saudi Arabia now. Someone told me that the biggest concert or festival in the world was held in Saudi this year, and the biggest stage was built this year in Saudi. So why is that? We can listen to music at home, in our cars. It's because we want to be around people that are like us, who like things like us, connect and sort of work on that energy. Now during COVID, I think Oliver Baxter might be here, the guru on Workspace. We were doing all these talks online, and I think trying to keep ourselves sane during lockdown, and joining seminars about the workspace and what have you. And Oliver said something which was an epiphany for me, and I thought this was really interesting. We were talking about the death of the office, right, during COVID, way too soon. 1 month into lockdown, 2 months into lockdown. Some organizations, I think it was Twitter, now X, were saying, right, 100% remote from here on in, based on 1 or 2 months worth of data. It was madness, really. But what Oliver said was, we're talking about the death of the office, but why are we not talking about the death of the restaurant? Right? We can all get delivered to home, right? And even some businesses flourished because they would put the party together and bring it to your house, right? Those businesses existed, but they did very well in many ways. So why were we not talking about the death of the restaurant? In many ways, we were doing everything we possibly could to get them open again, right? Governments around the world, I know the UK, for example, put together an initiative called Dine Out to Help Out, right? And it was to get people back into restaurants, back into cafes. Why was that? But we were talking about the death of the office. Now, there are economic reasons, of course, but it was really because it's something in us. There's the social element. We've got to interact. We need each other. It's essential. We've got to be together, and I think we learned this over the COVID period. We need each other. Now, I only added this slide this morning because I was out with our Riyadh team last night, and we had a great conversation about one of our team, and I won't mention names, said he likes to meet girls through smoking. Right? He asks for a light. I won't mention names. He's a younger member of our team. And we got into a conversation about when smoking was banned in Ireland, I think first, and then UK, Australia, various parts of the world. And everybody, a lot of disgruntled smokers had to smoke outside. And there was an upsurge. There was lots of articles and research on people meeting through smoking. A lot of innovation happening through smoking. That interaction that was happening sort of round the back door of an office, or wherever outside a bar or restaurant. And there's even been case studies where people have been promoted because they smoke. And what I mean by that is they're spending more time with the boss smokes, they're outside having a cigarette with the boss, building a relationship, building a connection, maybe promoted for the right reasons, maybe not. But they're building a connection with the boss. So it was a last minute slide. So let's talk about some research. I won't bore you with data, but Gallup is an initiative. It's a business, a research business that some of you may have heard of. They do polling, they do engagement surveys, they've got some fantastic tools. It's a US-based company. You hear a lot of companies say they've got a great culture, right? I think we have a great culture at Blue House. How do we know? How do we measure that? It's usually senior management saying they've got a great culture. Often if you ask people further down the tier, they might have a different opinion. So we like to use tools that at least give us a level of validation around, are we doing the right thing? Because it's not always going to be good. Now, we use a tool called Gallup Engagement Surveys. It's been going since 1998. 35 million people have used this engagement survey. So there's a lot of validation to this. Now, within this survey, it asks the same 12 questions, and it has done for 26 years. Maybe they've tweaked it a little bit. No matter what size business you are, no matter what sector you're in, it asks the same 12 questions, right? And then it produces an engagement survey. What it also does, there's a thing called, I've forgotten the name, but it allows you to make anonymous verbatim. It allows you to make anonymous feedback on the business, good, bad, and the ugly, right? Now, sometimes it's unpleasant, even in my own business. But you hope that on the whole it's good, but it's anonymous, right? And it was interesting on the panel earlier on, I think it was the lady here, was talking about this idea that we don't always get honest feedback. Now, Gallup engagement surveys do, but look at this question here. Isn't this really interesting, right? Why would that be one of the 12 questions? Why would that be important, right, as a question, right? It's odd, right? We're paid to come to work. We're paid to do a 9 to 5 or whatever. We're paid to deliver X, Y, and Z. They ask that question because it's about trust. If somebody can say, I have a best friend at work, that means that they have somebody at work that they trust, that they connect with, that they're familiar with. It could be more than one person, but at least they have one person at work that they can connect with. So it's really interesting that that question is there. Gallup also has a tool called Clifton Strengths, which is amazing, and I suggest if you're not using it, look it up. It's basically a survey where there's 34 strengths identified, and it identifies your top 5 and your top 10. Now, we at Blue House and many organizations, we want to drive a culture of, people have weaknesses. Let's not focus on those. We won't ignore them, but let's focus on your top 5. What are you really strong at? And let's lean into that, right? Now, we're not going to talk about me, but for the purpose of an example, this is my results, okay? So input number 1, relator number 2, learner number 3, arranger number 4, belief. You don't need to understand them in any detail. But if you take input, for example, you have a balcony and you have a basement. Balcony is when you're at your best, you're in the flow, you're smashing it out of the park, right? The basement is everybody has a balcony and everybody has a basement. The basement is when you're really not, right? And I see it in myself. When I did this survey in 2016, I didn't get this. But over a period of a year or two, I realized this is exactly who I am. Now, a lot of my team are actually, or a few of my team are here. So when you look at the balcony, I sort of get that. But then you look at the basement, knows a lot of worthless information, boring conversationalist, cluttered mind. We'll know by the end of this presentation whether you believe that to be true. So this is what's more interesting. It's less about me and more about the business. Okay, everybody in our business in Blue House has done Gallup Strength Finder. We use it as an interview tool, right, to see where they fit in the business, right? So it's really about our top 5 as a business. Now this is Blue House, okay? Again, 58 people. The names, we're not going to go through it in any detail, but if you look at the top 4, they are the themes: executing, influencing, relationship building, strategic thinking. So we're very strong in executing. Maybe not surprising, given what we do. We deliver projects, right? Most people in this room will, right? A little bit weak in influencing, but maybe that's not a problem. Strong in relationship building. But, one area we're very strong in, thankfully, is responsibility. So that says something about our business. But it's about the collective, right? It's about understanding the business. A little bit more research. This is a survey by the Journal of Environmental Psychology. So below the line in blue is higher at home. This is what's better at home. Above the line is what's better at the office. Now, this isn't the point I'm looking to make, but I find this really interesting. This says something about our industry, and we really need to take note of this. Temperature, air quality, noise, and natural light is better at home. With all the money that everybody spends on offices, expensive consultants, contractors, acoustic product smart, we really need to work on that. How can that be better at home than it would be in the office, right? It really shouldn't be. Anyway, If we look at the skyscraper, that one is connection with co-workers. I mean, it's beyond the numbers. Motivation is also another tower, very high. In between those two is stress, anxiety, tiredness, and fatigue, right? Higher in the office. Really shouldn't be, right? That's where we're connecting. We're bumping into people. By being with other people, we should be energized, right? We should be going to the office to be energized, right? So again, something we really need to think about, and something I want to talk about today. And then well-being, and this is quite interesting. Time spent walking, right? Now I'm guessing that's the commute, that's walking around in the building, that's getting a cup of coffee, that's walking to a meeting, so maybe not surprising. The next one is time spent resistance training. Now on the basis that not many offices have gyms, I'm guessing that's connected to Fitbits, Whoops, maybe apps, because we're actually moving around a lot more. It just shows how little we move when we're working remotely from home. So it's the power of diversity. And I don't just mean male, female, older, younger, different races. I mean skill sets, right? Skills right across the business, making sure that we're bringing them together so you don't get groupthink. You don't get a lot of the same people saying the same things and arriving at the same conclusion. So the power of serendipity. We're going to talk about collisions, but we're going to talk about the power of serendipity, which is essential. And when you think about it, it's essential in everything we do, in all of our lives. We might meet people here today that have an influence on the direction we go in from here on in. We might meet people today who are life-changing, right? It might be a change of job, it could be a new contract, who knows? Serendipity, the word, the research I got was from a British nobleman traveling through Persia, and it came from a Persian poem. There's lots of different meanings if you go on the web of the translations, if you like. The one I like the most is happy accident, right? Serendipity means happy accident. So it's an accident, wasn't supposed to happen, but actually it's pretty good that it did. And that's really something that we need to make sure and try drive more within the workplace, and we're really not. So let's look at application, and I've chosen this project. It's one of our favorite projects that we delivered a few years ago. It's the Do Telecom HQ in Dubai, where we took a client, and by the way, we won this contract in the middle of COVID, right? So we were taking all the learning from pre-COVID, but also doing interviews whilst people were locked down at home, right? It was quite interesting. So we were sort of learning on the job about what we really needed to do coming out of it. Now this was a tower, they had 21 floors, and this is some of the feedback that we got from the interviews. So let's break down barriers, group together as a team, collaborative, open and welcoming, energetic, productive and agile, all out. They wanted to be 100% open plan. And this was right across the business, right? This, no matter what hierarchy you were at. Overall, a space that brings about happiness. Destination, not an obligation. And I'll explain what that means. What they wanted was a workspace that was so enticing. They were moving towards hybrid. I think they were looking at 70-30, right? But they wanted a workplace that was so enticing that on the day that you had the option to work from home, you still chose to come in, right? You still had all the tools there. You wanted to come in and be with your colleagues. Simple and seamless workplace, digital lifestyle provider. So what was missing from this workspace? I mean, it seemed pretty good. They were a successful business. They were making money. They were doing very well. When we walked around the office, it seemed like they had a great culture. And what was missing was connection. What we found was there was people in the same department, 2 floors apart, never met each other, right? Although they'd both been with the business for, say, 5 years. There was very little connection, I should say. I won't say there's no connection. So connection was what was really, really missing. And when you think about what they do, they're a telecom provider. Communication is pretty important, right? So we sort of thought we'd focus on that. And we always work on what we call the big idea. What's going to tie this space together? What's going to energize it? So we looked at this idea of the live link. Now, as we know, within any typical workspace, there's 4 key components, right? Everything from focus and casual work to collaboration, social, and meetings. Really, the 4 components that make up any workplace. There might be 1 or 2 extras, like a gym or what have you. So they were moving from a 21-story building to a 6-story building with a much larger floor plate. But what we wanted to do was make sure that the vertical connection was working, right? Let's activate the fire escapes. Let's encourage people to use those. Maybe they'll collide within those fire escapes. And there was a fitness element to that as well. Doesn't clog up the lifts either. Now, the building is a big rectangle, which does help. It's the most efficient building to work in. Not all buildings are like this, I understand that. But this gives you an idea of what we mean by the live link, right? So the green area was what we called the social zone. So level 1 was just going to be collaboration, meetings, external visitors. So someone like myself shouldn't really be going on the office floors. Someone should be coming down to meet me on the social floor, which I'll show you in a moment. We then looked at the live zone. So the area around the core was going to be where the energy was driven, right? This was going to be, a really powerful place. It was going to be alive. It was going to energize people. The blue area around the periphery was quiet. It was focused, right? So trying to break down a typical day, the same way that you might at home, right? And this probably gives you a better idea of how the floor works. So again, the blue area was the focus work. It was quiet. It was much more, head down, 2 hours, 3 hours of work. The live link is the red area around the core. So what would happen is you'd come in the morning, you were almost forced to go through this energetic space. You'd go to the toilet, say 3 times a day, you'd go through this energetic space. When you left at the end of the day, you'd go through this energetic space. Now within that live link, there was everything that you needed. All the components, all the rooms, everything within that space. Now if you look at the top right, you can sort of see how this is starting to come together as we're developing the design, right? So the blue area is the live link. So we've even got Spotify music, background music, playing within that zone, right? The idea is once you get up from your desk, you've maybe been working for 2 or 3 hours, your brain is fried, or you've been in a meeting, you're brought into that live space, there's music, the kind of thing that we would expect when we walk into a Starbucks. Why not have it in the office, right? And we started to look at what this might look like, tune into. We even came up with the idea that we'd have Spotify or Apple in a way that, we'd have an app that you choose the music, right? You've got a 20-minute break, you choose the music. It's not hard, the technology exists, right? So it's giving everybody a bit of control over that space as well. So again, as we start to develop it, you can start to see how it comes around. All of the area around the outside is quiet, it's focus, it's team meetings, but the area around the core is energized. Very deliberately, you have no choice. You have no choice but to go through that space, right? Very deliberately, right? Now, there's extroverts and there's introverts, right? And we know that both of them need energizing, right? We learned a lot about extroverts and introverts during COVID, didn't we? The extroverts hated it, or lockdown, and the introverts loved it, right? People used to say to me, what was the difference between everybody in your business? And what I found was it wasn't about age or race or nationality. It was actually about introverts and extroverts during lockdown. That was kind of the distinction. But then we started to work with the branding and marketing department and started to create a language around it, right? Not just a physical space. What do people call it, right? If someone for level 4 is coming down to level 2, let's meet at the live link, right? And we know now that they're using this language, right? So we're going beyond the physical, working with branding agencies within the organization. So they've now been in the space about 8 or 9 months, and everything that the way we hoped they would use it is how they're using it. So the social floor is the floor I told you about on level 1. Now this is a photograph. It does look a little bit like a rendering, but it's a photograph. So they've got security on ground floor, but this is the reception on level 1. But we wanted to create familiarity. So this is the reception, but it's a living room. Now, there's nobody in here now, but if you go there on any given day, it's really busy, right? There's a good energy, there's background music, it feels fantastic. Then we have the kitchen. So again, multiple uses, coffee bar. They have events in here, everything from somebody having a cup of coffee to a one-on-one meeting to a town hall. Birthdays, they celebrate pretty much everything in this organization. They'll go down to the social floor, have a cake. those rooms at the back there, and I think this is really important, what we call just in time, right? You might collide with somebody, you might have a conversation with them, and you get into something that's quite animated maybe. All of a sudden that meeting turns into something that's actually a bit more confidential. You've got somewhere that you can duck into. But they're also bookable for dining. So teams can actually have, instead of going out to a restaurant, they can actually have their team lunch within the space. And then areas that, frankly, we don't fully understand how they would be used. And I think that's the point, right? They can use it however they want. So you might have a workshop happening on the left there and a workshop happening on the right, two completely different conversations. And as we know, not everything needs to be done in private. But somebody might walk through the middle there very deliberately, catch somebody's eye, get involved in the conversation. What do you think about this? That's where the innovation happens. That's where the serendipity happens. And then we have playrooms. Now, it's a table tennis table and it gets used for table tennis, which is great. But I've seen in this space where they have people stood around, they'll be using the screen, they're actually having a workshop, and then at the end of it, they have a game of table tennis, right? Fantastic. And it's about connecting the team, lots of visibility as well. So the live link is the space that I told you about that's around the core, and this is one of the spaces. So on the left-hand side, that's where you come in the morning. So again, we're forcing people to come through this space. There's Spotify playing in the background. We even worked with them. They created an essence that is what it smells like within this space as well. That's unique to do. The coffee bar. There's a gaming station, not on this floor, but another floor. There's HR services down there. On the corners, we created what we call the junctions. And again, very deliberately, there may be a presentation, a conversation, a workshop happening here, but very deliberately, people randomly walk through this space, right? They might walk around the corner, very, very deliberately, catch somebody's eye, get involved in the conversation. And again, this is exactly what's happening. So it's creating those collisions, creating those serendipitous moments of magic, and that's where the innovation happens. And then what we call the community areas, where very open, multiple different spaces. You could literally, in any given day, just move from one space to another throughout the day, if focus is not your need for that day. Now, something closer to home, we're currently working on the Ministry of Economy and Planning in Granada Towers, 14 floors. Working with His Excellency the Minister, very forward-thinking, very progressive guy. The brief was really, let's open everything up, let's get people connecting, let's get people talking to each other. We've got a bit of a problem between departments, etc. So very, very much on board and very much driven by him. Now, this has only just been handed over, so we don't have photos yet. We've delivered 4 floors. But the idea is to create 2 floors on the lower level. The building is not a beautiful rectangle, which is the most efficient space. It's a little bit more awkward. But the idea is to create multiple spaces, multiple opportunities, encourage everybody to use the space for celebrations, for meetings, for one-on-ones. We don't have any closed meeting rooms on the upper floors. But to create familiarity, to create spaces that actually we recognize from coffee shops, we recognize from places that we go to malls, maybe from home as well. Now, I've sort of thrown this in because I think it highlights the point. I had a beautiful conversation with a client a while ago. I don't know if she's here. She said she might come along. So I hope I've got this right. Where we were looking beyond the physical, right? And she came up with this idea. She said, look, in the stations, in the serveries, we want to serve home-baked cookies, right? And we want the smell, we want the floors to smell of home-baked cookies, right? Now, we took this conversation a bit further and said, well, okay, why don't we have the logo of the Ministry of Economy and Planning stamped on each one of the cookies? And she said, and I don't want to sell these cookies. I want everybody to take them home, take them to meetings, right? So the point being is that we're creating this beautiful space, and it looks great, and it's fantastic, and it ticks all the boxes from a performance point of view. But they, and I will say it wasn't our idea, it was their idea, wanted to take it a step further. So this idea that, who doesn't love the smell of home-baked cookies, right? But to bring the smell and then the brand into the cookie, such a simple thing, very low cost, but taking it a step further so that it brings the senses into the space. I think as interior designers and consultants, we really need to be thinking beyond the physical. Now this is another slide that I added after our group meeting last night. Everybody knows Nokia, but when anyone my age at least, we sort of have a sentimental attachment to our old Nokia phone or our first mobile phone. I had one of these. You could throw them against the wall and they would literally bounce back at you. And we loved it. And now we're talking about, oh, wasn't it great? We didn't have screens. We weren't constantly hassled by emails. And I'm thinking about getting another one of these. But Nokia, at one point in time, as I'm sure many of you know, had the market share for mobile phones. They were the first. They were smashing it out of the park. They were unstoppable, right? I think 60% of market share. The other option was BlackBerry, which was fairly new at the time. What happened to Nokia, right? And this was a statement that was made. I'm not having a dig at the CEO. I'm sure he's a fantastic guy. But it was a very dramatic end to their sort of market share around mobile phones, right? And that was a statement that was put out. Now, I'm sure they meant it, right? We did nothing wrong, but somehow we lost. Now, if you do your research on Nokia and why that model sort of fell apart, there's a few reasons why. One of them is they didn't take the smartphone sort of revolution seriously enough or quickly enough, right? There's that element. There was an arrogance in the business. We've got 60, 70% market share. Who are these other guys on our tails? But overwhelmingly in the research, it was the fact that the business was not communicating. They were working in silos. You had one team over here who had a project, but they weren't sharing it with another team in another part of the building, possibly in another country. But there was no communication, there was no collaboration. So they were hugely successful. They had everything to guarantee their success for many, many years to come. But it was lack of coming together, sharing information, those moments of serendipity, those collisions that really they should have been driving that would have guaranteed their success for many, many years to come. Overwhelmingly, apart from not taking smartphones seriously, overwhelmingly it was that lack of collaboration, that lack of communication, that lack of serendipity that was the downfall of Nokia. So why is it so important? Now, why do we all come here when we could probably do this online, I think, right? But we couldn't, could we? I think we learned that about COVID. We need to be here. We need to be connected. And it's interesting that this is not even being screened online, right? This is all physical. And it really comes down to one thing. It comes down to trust, right? And it goes back to that question in Gallup, doesn't it? I have a best friend at work, right? Really strange question, but it's there for a reason. I'm sure it's created by a lot of very smart people who say that question needs to be in there, right? It's about trust, right? It's very difficult to build trust online. It's not impossible, but it takes a long, long, long time. So fundamentally, it comes down to trust. People do business with people they trust and people that they like, and we're more likely to share and give and encourage and help with people we trust. Social interaction builds familiarity, which builds trust. Now, as I talked about with diversity, it's not just about male, female, age, race, etc. It's about familiarity. We've got to know each other. We've made a connection, right? We have something in common. We're in a business we love. We're in an industry we love. We may have different skills, but there's a familiarity between us. So the power of serendipity is fundamental, and it affects all of us. And there will be serendipitous moments today, right, that just come from this event. We know it's influenced many parts, and we all know who these two guys are. They met by accident, right, changed the world. We all know who these two guys are. They met by accident, changed the world of music at least. We know late Zaha Hadid, if you look at the research, she talks about serendipitous moments in influencing architecture and how she became the lady that she became, right? Hugely successful. Sergey Brin, Larry Page came together by accident, right? I think it was at MIT. They were doing the tour and they just bumped into each other, had a conversation, changed the world. Henry Ford, Thomas Edison met by accident, changed the world. Now, many won't know who this guy is. Some might. Sir Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web, right? And when you look at the research, changed the world, right? That was accidental. So it was during a conversation at CERN, which many of you might know. an accidental conversation with a couple of people in a meeting and ran a code, and that's how that came around, changed the world. So the power of serendipity is something that I don't think we take seriously enough when we design workspace. I think, you know, and I can say this because I'm an interior designer and I'm in the business, there's too much ego in our business. It's too much, you know, we want to make something look beautiful, and it was talked about in the panel before. That's important, of course, aligning with the brand, making it look great, getting people excited, wanting them to come in. But we need to dig much deeper than that. It's got to be around connection, collision, serendipity. So going back to this gentleman, again, incredible story, and I encourage you to look him up, and the journey that he went on to create the success that he did and achieve silver medal at the Olympics, Saudi Arabia's first medal, which is amazing. And given the investment in Saudi Arabia in sport and where the country's going, I'm sure there's going to be many, many more. So what we need to do a lot more of within our industry, certainly within the workplace sector, is design to collide, design to collaborate, design to communicate, design for humanity, take on board really the human element of what we're doing. We need to design for serendipity. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's working. Thank you, Ben, so much for this such an insightful keynote presentation. I would like to open up a floor if we have some questions for Ben. Yes, perfect. Okay, can I get the mic here? Two questions. Thank you.
Hello. As am I specialized in BIM. You are a company specialized in BIM. So I would like to ask, are you using BIM in your design or method of the analysis and engagement in construction or in production of drawings?
Hold the mic a bit closer.
Yeah. So I will repeat my question. So we know the importance of BIM requirements. So it's important in every, in Qaddiya, in all the places. So as am I specialized in BIM, so I would like to ask if you are using this technology in your submissions and regarding the designs.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. We've been using BIM since, or Revit since 2014. I think there's the engineering side, the collaboration side, the clash detection side, but I also think it's, going back to this, I think it's a great communication tool as well. It's something that we use a lot. Ultimately, I think we sometimes forget this in our industry. Our job is to communicate, right? If we have a great idea, it means nothing if we can't communicate it to the client. We can't get it across. So yes, we do use BIM. No question, it's the future. But in terms of this topic, I think it's essential, and it's something we use as a communication tool as well.
Hello. I find that quite often the mentality in offices is that if you're not sat at your desk, you're not working. And what you're kind of promoting with the collaboration idea is quite the opposite of that. How do you persuade the business leaders to get away from that train of thought of if you're not sat at your desk, you're not working?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a great question, and there's no silver bullet answer to that. I think it really comes down to the leadership. You know, the leadership need to be much more open-minded. But I think that's where Gallup and tools like Gallup come into it, right? Because, you know, they're tangible. You know, they give you a result. You know, when you hear people say, we have a great culture, which we hear a lot, how do we know as leaders? So it has to come down to results. It has to come down to performance. There will always be those leaders. I think there's a lot of talk about getting everybody back into the office now for 4 or 5 days a week in some cases. And I think one of the topics at the moment is Amazon, isn't it? They want everybody back in. So I think it comes down to the leadership style. There has to be an element of trust. But trust works both ways, right? It can't just be the leadership trusting the employees. They have to make sure trust is something that's earned, right? And if they've earned that trust with the leadership, the chances are the leaders will allow them a bit more freedom. But tools help, like Gallup and various other things like that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Do we have any more questions? Okay, I think we can wrap up discussion. Thank you, Ben, so much for joining us. Can we have a round of applause? Thank you for such an insightful